Okay, Stephen K. Peeples here, and I'm with another record industry veteran named Steve Meyer. He's actually one of my colleagues at Capitol Records back in the late '70s. And Steve is actually from the East Coast, and we share something else in common in that he worked in Miami, and I grew up there. So we're going to start off this conversation with a little of Steve's background and how you wound up in Miami and what you were doing there for Capitol Records. So take it away, Steve. Good to have you here.
Hey, great to see you, Stephen. I attended the University of Miami and graduated in '69, and soon thereafter, I was fortunate enough to get a job with Capitol Records, and it happened totally by accident. The reason I got the job, frankly, was a friend of mine and I were singing and playing guitar on a balcony overlooking the second story of the apartment we were in. And a guy who was walking in the building who heard us knocked on the door and asked us if he wanted to book us into the coffee house near the university. And we said no. We were just hanging out and singing Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel. And he said he was leaving Capitol Records to go to work for a rack jobber. You know what they were, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he went to work for the largest rack job in Miami, in Florida at that time, called United Record and Tape. And I said, boy, I would kill to work for Capitol Records. And he asked me a few questions and he recommended me. And I was interviewed. And the interview basically consisted of the sales director asking me about artists like Leon Russell and Stevie Winwood and Dave Mason and what I knew about them. And after I was finished with the interview, he said, you know more about my current salesman, and we have a problem because, the Beatles are breaking up, and we're going to have to replace that revenue with these new artists. And they really don't know about these new artists, and we need people that know about them. So he offered me the job, and I started 1 week later. I started as a salesman, and I did that for almost a year. And I was selling retail record stores from Miami to West Palm Beach. And then almost a year later to the date, we had a new vice president of promotion named Roger Karshner. And he had a vision that FM radio was going to be a very, very impacted force for the record industry. And he saw what was happening in New York and in San Francisco, in Chicago and Boston. And he wanted to have promotion people just work at FM radio and work albums. And Capitol Records was the first one that ever did that. So he interviewed me at the Tower in Hollywood. And he offered me the job to go back to New York and work with WNEW, WPLJ, and the stations out on Long Island and New Jersey. And it was an incredible time for me because I had grown up with the New York stations, listening to them. And I got to meet John Lennon during that time. And almost a year to the date of my being in New York, the sales director in Miami called me and asked me if I'd like to come back as a promotion man for the state. And I always wanted to do full-fledged promotion. That was working top 40, that was working albums and adult contemporary and everything. And my wife at the time was from Miami and she wanted to go back. So we jumped at the opportunity and I came back. And that's how I ended up back in Miami.
Well, we got to jump back to New York here because we got to hear how I met John Lennon and the circumstances behind that encounter. So please share that with us.
Yeah, that happened quite by accident, and it almost got me fired. And we had a great industry trade liaison in New York City. He was a legend. He still is. His name is Joe Maimone. And he was the one going to the trade publications. And at that time, they were all in New York City, Billboard, Cashbox, and Record World. And he would go there every week and present our records, and he would coordinate, get the charts, and send them out to Hollywood. He was in the hospital, and I don't remember what for, but he was hospitalized. And the sales director in New York gave me the duty to cover the trades for him. John had previously come by the office and introduced himself to several people. And I had met him very briefly there, just like who I was. And I said, I'd like to take NADW at some time. And he said, we'll get to that. And it was during the Imagine album. And eventually the album went to 1. And the week it went to 1, I said, well, I'll call him and I'm sure he knows, because back then he was working with Alan Klein and his company, and they were on John all the time. So I figured he must have already known, but I called anyway. And I believe he was staying, this is 50 years ago, but I believe at the time he was staying at the St. Regis. I called over there and went through about 10 call screeners. And finally he picked up the phone and he said, it's John. And I said, you met me very briefly at the office. I just want to let you know, I'm sure you already know, but I'm just confirming for you that the Imagine album went to #1. And there was dead silence for a second. And I said, hello. And he went, #1 in Billboard? And I said, yeah. And then he yelled out, we're #1. And I heard a bunch of people in the background. And he didn't know. He hadn't been not been told yet. And he said, this is fantastic. It's the kind of news that Yoko and I just needed with all this other stuff going on. You know, at that time he was fighting the immigration stuff with the government, and and Yoko was trying to get her daughter, and it was a whole mess. Anyway, he said to me, would you like to come over and have a drink with us? And I went, sure, love to. So I walked over there, and here I was in jeans and in my jacket, and my hair was pretty long, and I had my my walrus mustache. And, you know, I walked into the room, and the minute I walked in, I said, I know I'm in the wrong place, because it was all suits. It was all Alan Klein people. There was an open bar in one corner of the room. And I went over and got a drink, and I saw John out of the corner of my eye. And I said to myself, I don't belong here. I got to get out of here. This is not my place to be here. He's with the business people. So I walked over, extended my hand, and said, hey, John, congratulations again. And I'll call you and we'll do radio and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I can see you're really busy, and I'll leave you alone tonight to celebrate. And he went, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to go back, you know, and do my work. And he said, no. Just wait a minute. Hold on a second. I said, no, it's okay. I can go. He said, no, I don't want you to go. So I went back to the bar, and after a few minutes, he waved me into where he was in the room. And we walked into another room that was adjacent. He shut the door. I think it was a sliding door. And he said, look, these people here, they're not my mates. They're people that work for me, and they're dealing with all the issues that we have to deal with. And he said, so I just wanted to say thank you and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, why don't you sit down and make yourself at ease and let's talk a little. And I said, if you really have to deal with these business people, again, I don't want to impose. And he said, no. What kind of music do you like? Like an idiot, I said, the Beatles. So, and then he laughed that off, and he said, well, he said, I'm just John now, so forget that. What do you like? And I said the magic words, because when I said it, I said Bob Dylan. When I said it, that was it. He just said, he said something like, he's the real shit or something, something to that effect. And we started talking about music, and one thing led to another, and we talked about a myriad of music. And the next thing I know, I look at my watch, and it's like almost 3 o'clock in the morning. And here I am. I've been talking to John for several hours, and I didn't realize how much time had passed. And I looked at my watch and I said, oh, I'm sorry I kept you up so late. I got to go. No, it's okay. I really enjoyed it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I got to go. I got to go to work in a few hours. And I went back, got a couple of hours sleep, went back to the office, and my secretary said to me, what in God's name happened? And I said, what are you talking about? She said, the president of Capitol Records has called here like twice already, Now you got to understand, it's 9 o'clock in New York. It's 6 a.m. in LA. And the president is calling me. Here I was, the album marketing promotion specialist for the whole East Coast, but I don't even know if he knew my name. But anyway, she said, you're supposed to call him the minute you get in. I called him, and he proceeded to basically ream me and ask me why I had called John Lennon. And I said, well, Joe Maimone is sick. I thought I should give him his chart number. He said, no, the president only gives the Beatles their numbers. No one else does. That's the rule. And you just broke that rule. And
where was that rule written, by the way?
Again, I had just taken over for Joe, and nobody told me. They said, go to the trades, present your stuff. No one said to me, don't have any communication with John or any of the Beatles. No one had ever told me anything about that. And I was a promotion manager, so I wanted to do the best job possible. I obviously wanted to call John too, to get him to commit to the radio that we had planned to do. But anyway, he told me he basically, never ever communicate with a Beatle again. All trade information regarding the Beatles and everybody else is to be forwarded to the tower immediately. So that was it. And after that phone call, I truly expected to be fired. I wasn't. But sometime after that, the president, who had talked to me, was fired.
Well, instant karma is not so instant, but there you go.
There you go.
Just for the record, back at the St. Regis in the Imagine period, John really wasn't in trouble with immigration yet. That didn't happen until '72, until he made the announcement that he was going to wanted to do a concert tour toward the end of the year to coincide with the political Republican convention. But he was hooked up. He was hooking up with Jerry Rubin and Bobby Seale, and
he was working.
Panthers,
I think at that.
All kinds.
And I think he was working.
Types.
I think he was working on the Sometime in New York City album too at that time.
Okay, that would have been with Elephant's Memory in late '71, early '72. Yeah.
He was dealing with a lot of stuff. I don't remember all of it, and like I said, it's over 50 years ago. He was dealing with a lot of stuff, and those suits were around him like an army.
Well, you were there. You talked with him for hours. What else did you talk about aside from music? I mean, did you talk about politics or
anything? It was all music, and it was focused. I would say we probably spent 15 to 20, the first 15 to 20 minutes or more on Bob Dylan. And I asked him, I think, is it really true that Bob Dylan turns you on to marijuana? After a while, when I first started,
what was his response? Tell me.
Well, first of all, let me step back, because when I first started talking to him, and it hit me that I'm talking to a Beatle that I watched on Ed Sullivan 5 years previously, that I got kind of mealy mouthed, and he kind of laughed about it, and he said, "Take it easy," But I was like, "Oh, I'm talking to a legend here," But anyway, I asked him if that was true, and he said, "Yes and no. We did it, and yes, but we knew what it was, and we had many people that had tried to give it to us previously. So, but being that Bob's a friend, if it means giving him credit, we'll give him credit." But we based a lot of, I'd say almost all of it was about music, and what did I like now? What did he like now? And it was just, he had a little 45 turntable in that room, and he played me some records. And
like what? Do you remember?
One of them was on the same label that Al Green was on. from that era. And I don't remember if it was him or Ann Peebles, or it was one of those records, and I can't remember what it was. And I actually, when we were talking, what I remember is I said specifically, you know, oh, did you ever hear this record, Stay With Me by Lorraine Ellison? You know, when I was in Miami, that was a huge R&B crossover. And he said, I don't know if I've heard that. And I said, I'm sure you've heard it. And I think I tried to sing the chorus, and he said, no, you know, I don't think, he said, I think I know that. And I said, well, that's a great record, and you know, you should pick that up. And everything we talked about was music.
Fantastic. All right, so let's go back to, I want to go back to Miami. You graduate, you get this job, just kind of fell into the business.
Yeah, total luck.
Which
total
is,
luck.
you know, I mean, that's the story, most of the story for most of us, but and everybody has a, you know, a great unique story. But let's go back to Miami and tell me what a day in the life was for you at your first job for Capitol there, and who you would see and what you would do and where you would go.
Well, my first promotion or the sales job?
The very first job that you got.
The very first job I got was I was the sales manager for the retail accounts from Miami to West Palm Beach. Right. And I dealt with all the key record retailers. At that time, the big retail chain was, you probably remember, Jefferson's.
Yep.
So they were my biggest account. And then the other one was Fixx Music. And I dealt with the buyers on all the stores, big and little, all the way up and down. And you'd go there weekly, and you would check on your inventory, and you would ask them if there's anything breaking out. You would make sure that your displays and your merchandising were correct in the store, if you had that. And if once a month, we had this folder, it looked like a portfolio folder, and that was called your new releases. And once a month, you'd go and you'd open that portfolio in front of all your accounts, and you'd literally show them the album cover, and you talk about the music. And at that time, they were signing a ton of new artists. That is when they started distributing and selling Island Records, Shelter Records. And so we had product that was coming. And, you know, Leon Russell, he wasn't a household name at that time. So it was a matter of educating retail. And actually, it taught me one of the greatest lessons in the world, because, you know, selling Beatle records was easy, and Beach Boys. And at that time, Glenn Campbell and Grand Funk were huge too. But when it came to selling a new artist, how do you break that artist into retail without airplay? So it fell upon you as a salesman, an individual, to come up with ideas. And that's what I did. I created in-store things. The most successful one I did was for the band. And when Music Pink, from Big Pink came out, even though it received critical acclaim everywhere, it was not a huge retail hit. And even with the Weight becoming a huge album song at that point, they hadn't really broken through it to any serious level of sales plateau. And what I did was I simply took a copy of a paragraph of the review from the album from Rolling Stone and a couple of places. I had it blown up to poster board size, and I put it in retail accounts from Miami all the way to West Palm Beach, and it started selling. And I also took the extra time to talk with the clerks, the guys and the girls behind the counter at retail stores who were really into the music and were working there not because of the money, but because they loved the music. So when you started talking to them about the music, they really appreciated it. And they then conveyed that hopefully to the consumer, which they did do in my area, because the album in my account started breaking and it started selling more and more and more. So that was just one of the things that I did, as a salesman. And I really, really had it in my DNA and my chemistry that I always was promoting my music. And I couldn't imagine having the opportunity to go to radio, but I was itching to do it. I never did it until I was offered the opportunity.
Well, then how did you make the segue to radio promotion from sales?
Again, that was a turn of events happened. Of course, or you might not know, but 69, 70, 70, 71, Capitol Records lost $8 million that year, $8 million. And that was the first time in history they'd ever lost money. And EMI handed them a strong mandate and said, you're going to cut back and you're going to make money, or we're going to look elsewhere. And I was the lowest sales manager on the totem pole as far as seniority was concerned. There were 3 other salesmen for Florida. So the salesman that we had upstate moved to Charlotte to work there, and they offered me the job for upstate if I wanted to stay with Capitol Records. And I really and truly was at a personal crossroad, because I really didn't want to leave Capitol Records, but I really and truly didn't want to be a traveling salesman, which if we lived upstate at that time, you were on the road 2 weeks out of the month.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that. And especially because the girl that I was dating was still in Miami and a year behind me, and I didn't want to leave her. So the sales manager, Jerry Brackenridge at that time, said, you really belong in promotion, and I'm going to make a phone call to the tower and speak to the head of promotion and talk to them about you. And he called this guy, Roger Karshner, and he told him all about me. And I ended up getting a ticket to go to the tower and interview with them. And he's the one that often expressed his vision about FM radio and sent me to New York. That's how I made the transition.
And then what was your mandate? Because this was really a transitional period between top 40 to FM to AOR, as it came to be known in the mid 70s, album-oriented rock.
That's correct.
Album-oriented radio, but it was actually Mike Harrison coined the term as album-oriented rock. But at the time you were doing this, this was a brand new format, basically. FM was blowing up, and it was finally the alternative to top 40 that long-haired hippies were looking for.
Yeah, and it was a boon for the record industry, and that's what Roger envisioned. He said these stations, and at that time the leading stations were BCN in Boston, KMET in Los Angeles, NEW in New York, PLJ in New York. You had these stations popping up in major markets. And what, of course, the salespeople in all these markets for every label saw was, well, my goodness, even though this album by XYZ doesn't have a single, it's selling because it's getting airplay on whatever station existed in the city. And Roger said, this is the beginning. He said, I see this spreading across the country. And he said, I think it's going to be huge, and it's going to be a boon for the record business. And of course, he was correct. And it was, for me, an extraordinary time to be in promotion, because you could actually walk into these stations and not only sit and present your music, but sit and talk about it. And even if you had the time to sit down and take a track on the album and say, you got to listen to this. And in many cases, the music directors and or program directors of those same stations would say, hey, while you're here, let me play you something. And it would be on another label. And we would sit there and just talk about music. And nobody was at these stations thinking about making a lot of money in the business, or, thinking that someday my station is going to be a giant station. We were doing what we did because we love music. It was a community of people that were just passionate about the music that we loved. And we were able to convey it to each other. And it was a very symbiotic relationship between radio and records, which of course doesn't exist today.
Right, right. Well, one of the first FM stations in Miami was WEDR.
Yes.
They were in 67 or 68, real low,
Yep.
low power FM. Carl Richardson was one of the DJs there, and he had later went to Criteria Studios and worked with the Bee Gees, and that's a whole other movie. But WEDR was in early '68. I remember as a listener in Miami, was the only place that you would hear Jimi Hendrix and Cream and some of the heavier Beatles stuff that that Top 40 radio wouldn't play. And we loved it.
They were known to everybody on the college campus, and I'm not sure if EDR morphed into Zeta 4. I'm thinking maybe they became Zeta 4.
You'd have to do a little research on that.
Yeah, but anyway, but while I was attending university, the two stations that everybody talked about that was into the music was EDR, and the other station was the college station, WVUM.
Right. Now, you also mentioned WMBM, which was the R&B station in town, and where I first heard James Brown before Top 40 ever played him, which was great. We were really lucky kids to have those of us who like that kind of music were lucky to have that outlet, and the DJs were crazy. It was a real raving, full on R&B station back in the day.
It was a great station.
They also the owner also launched an FM station in Miami. Tell us a little bit about that and how that happened and how that affected the market.
Yeah. First of all, let me say, when I first came back to Miami as a promotion man, I had to cover MBM. So when we had, releases that were R&B and black artists and stuff, I made sure they were delivered to MBM, because we did not have at that time a full-fledged R&B staff. It was coming, but we didn't have it yet. But anyway, the owner of that station, MBM, was a monster station, and they really, really sold music, and they were making a lot of money. He decided to take, when the FM thing started with rock, take his FM outlet, which at that time I think was playing either beautiful or classical music, obviously not making any money. It was a tax write-off. And he launched, and he brought in some crew and some of these guys that love music, and he launched WBUS, the Magic Bus FM. And their signal was not as strong as the stations that came later, Zeta 4, etc. But they had one of the greatest and most creative and innovative air staffs that to this day they were all great. You had an English guy named Mick Dean, who I'm still friends with today, who still lives in Florida. You had the craziness of the Cosmic Traveler, who was Ron Shafford, who, may he rest in peace. I first met when I promoted him at WVUM. And there was Charmaine was the female afternoon drive, and they were incredible. They were all, and back then at BUS, literally there was no like program director hawking over them about new releases. So you could work the individual air personalities as well as the music director. And I would make sure that every time I went to the station, and that I went to any album station, but I always brought copies for the entire staff, so that they could all take the music home and listen to it as well for their shows. And they really, really became, for me and for the other labels as well, a very, very important launch pad for music. And they launched a lot of my album sales. And as did, by the way, several stations in the state. There was a station up in Jacksonville, WAIV, The Wave, programmed by a guy named Bill Bartlett, who later went to work for Capitol, by the way.
Yep.
And who he discovered Little River Band. And he was the one that broke it wide open in the state of Florida by calling states up and telling them, you got to play this track Long Way There. and it spread from Jacksonville to Tampa to Orlando to Miami, and we launched that band there.
Beautiful long guitar solo in a 6 or 7 minute track.
Yeah,
and
beautiful.
And somebody came up with the idea to edit it as a single, and then who and how it was edited and where is part of the story. So we got about 2 minutes. Go.
Okay. Well, quickly, Bill Bartlett honed right in on that track. I brought the album up there and talked to him about it. He took it home. He called me up the next day and said, "I love this. I'm going to start playing it. It's Crosby, Stills and Nash like, and it's incredible." And so he took that and crusaded it not only through the state of Florida, but actually in the whole region. At that time, I then got promoted to the Tower, and when I got into the Tower in national promotion, I had the passion in me from seeing what the album sales were in Florida. So I started crusading it. And Ray Tuscan, our head of album promotion, said it's starting to spread. And he took it upon himself, and we discussed it. And he went into the studio with Mr. Snips, our legendary engineer and producer, John Palladino. And they came out with a edit that I think was a little, it was just either 4 minutes or a little over, I'm not sure. And that ended up being Little River Band's first national hit. It went top 40.
It's a great record. Well, Steve, let's wrap up this portion of our conversation. I'd like to pick it up again with your experience at the Tower and some of the other projects that you work with and some of the other artists that you work with. And I also want to talk with you about Beatles rarities.
Okay.
Because I actually
love to talk about anything Beatles.
I worked on that a little bit with Randall Davis and Henry Marquez and Roy Kahara. And,
yep. And I worked with Randall on Real Music, on our love songs.
And Real Music was, I think, one of Mr. Snip's last projects at Capitol, actually.
Yeah,
John was a neighbor of mine. We got to hang out and talk in recent years.
He was just, yeah, and he was brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant. He was so good. He did all our edits. He did the edit on Night Moves, on Band on the Run, and you know, he was a magician in the studio.